Before I start this video, I'm going to answer a very important question. Yes, this is sweat. Now, for my entire lifetime as a reader, there have been three great literary love affairs of mine. The first is fantasy and sci-fi as a genre. The second is world literature, which is pretty much my job to talk about, and especially books from China, Korea, and Japan. Those are my real great loves. And number three is a fairly recent love affair that has blossomed over the last 3 or 4 years and is really, really intense. And it cannot be summed up no matter how hard I try. So I'm going to call it contemporary, historical, Gothic, possibly horror fiction by British women. Now, the books I'm going to talk about pretty much fit into two categories. They are functionally the same, but the one category means they are scary, they are horror in some way, and the other means that they are not, but they are still historical Gothic fiction by women. All of these books very much succeed great writers like Daphne du Maurier, Susan Hill, Shirley Jackson, and the Brontes, but they are new. And they're exciting. Some of them are supernatural and fantastical in some way, and they pretty much form this wonderful home that I like to live in, full of so much Gothic comfort and fear and terror, which I just want to live in forever and ever. So let's talk about some of these. Now, when we think about the Gothic genre, we think about the greats, like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which is still today my favorite novel ever, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and most of the books by the Brontes. Depending on what sister and what book you're talking about, it might be romantic or Gothic or both, but I would definitely put Wuthering Heights firmly in the Gothic category, for example. It's really, really hot. The books that I'm going to talk about have all been released in the past 3 or 4 years, and they just keep coming. All of these authors have sequels or second or third books coming out. They are churning out incredible historical Gothic, maybe horror, maybe not, fantastical works of beautiful British fiction. This book is the reason that I'm making this video now. I've wanted to make this video for a year because these books have taken up so much of my time. Whenever I'm not talking about international literature for Books and Bow, it's these books that I'm reading and thinking about. And this one, Anita Frank's The Lost Ones, is a beautiful, beautiful debut novel that is perfectly Susan Hill / Shirley Jackson-esque. And it's kind of like Downton Abbey, but with ghosts. It's set during the First World War, and it recounts the story of Stella. Stella was a nurse during World War I, and her fiancé was a soldier who didn't make it home. After Gordon's death, she decides to live with her sister, Madeline. Madeline is married and pregnant, and her husband is the heir to a great Downton Abbey-esque rural English house. And so Stella goes to live with her sister, and her sister is being haunted by the sound of a child. And most of the story is Stella and Madeline trying to figure out if Lucian's ghost is there, trying to convince everyone else who lives and works in this big abbey house that Lucian is actually there and haunting, and most importantly, why. So this is a very sad, intense drama because Stella's relationship with her lost fiancé is front and center, and it kind of inspires a lot of what she's doing. You can plainly see that what she's doing is a kind of work of distraction for herself. But she's also trying to help her sister, and she's also trying to do something good for a potentially lost soul. So this is a very satisfying ghost story, and it's also a very satisfying family drama, and it's also quite feminist. It has a lot of elements of men pretty much ignoring the women in question and calling them hysterical and calling them mad and coming up with reasons and excuses for what they're believing because surely it can't be real. These women are mad, etc., etc. So The Lost Ones is the book that inspired me to come up with this little pair of lists which I'm going to run through. Keeping with the horror element, which The Lost Ones is a part of, you've also got the books of Laura Purcell. Laura Purcell's books pretty much started my love affair with this enormous women's historical Gothic horror fiction collection genre thing that I am now living inside in my lovely little house. Laura Purcell has so far published 3 novels, The Silent Companions, The Corset, and Bone China, with a 4th book coming out in, I think, March 2021, and I can't remember what that book is called. The Silent Companions, like The Lost Ones, is a perfectly condensed horror story set in a terrifying old house in the English countryside. Lots of nighttime hauntings, lots of rain and thunder, lots of Gothic settings. It has an environment that is very evocative of the Brontes, of Frankenstein, of Dracula. It has this sublime kind of element in terms of the pathetic fallacy and the gritty, rugged atmosphere and landscape that the house is set in, as well as what goes on within this house. Whenever you read this book, you have a sense that the lights are off all the time. It is always dark, it is always bleak, it is always dreary, and it is dripping with emotional paranoia and fear and anxiety and disbelief and pointing fingers. And it's a fantastic book. In fact, if you are interested in The Lost Ones, The Silent Companions, which I don't have, would be a perfect silent companion to The Lost Ones. These books work perfectly together. Laura Purcell's 2nd book is The Corset. The Corset is set in a madhouse with 2 protagonists, one being a potential murderer, 2 women. One is a potential murderer, the other is a woman who wants to figure out if she did it, how she did it, and why she did it. And the 2 of them, their stories overlap and go back and forth between one narrative and the other. The Corset is a little less horror, but it's just as much surreally unsettling and strange and beautifully imaginative. Her 3rd novel, Bone China, is set in Cornwall, I think, on a cliff. A big house on a cliff. It feels very, very Daphne du Maurier-esque, and it has 2 narratives that it moves between. One set in the present, but not our present, the present and the past, doing this a lot. The present is a maid who has just arrived at the house. She has a shady backstory, and she is getting to know the old woman who is kind of the woman of the house. The other narrative, the past, is that old woman when she was a young woman living in this house with her father. And there is an intense amount of supernatural horror going on in this book. I absolutely love the fact that Laura Purcell is able to churn out like a book a year, and every single one of these is an absolute Gothic horror, Daphne du Maurier / Susan Hill-esque masterpiece. If you love Gothic horror in any capacity, Laura Purcell is the new Susan Hill. She's the new Shirley Jackson. She is the new Daphne du Maurier. She's all of that. One book that fits into this Gothic horror by British women category here is a book that I haven't actually read yet, but I do own, that I haven't gotten to, which is called Wakenhurst by Michelle Paver. I can't say much about it because I haven't read it yet, but I am very, very excited to. And tell me in the comments, can't say that, if you've read Wakenhurst. Again, I have it. I am going to read it. I just ain't got there yet. So the other category over here, which is the exact same genre, but without the horror. These are Gothic historical fiction by British women novels that might have a kind of fantastical element, some kind of supernatural element, but isn't necessarily horror or scary in any way. The number 1 book on that list is, without a doubt, The Binding by Bridget Collins. The Binding is an incredible supernatural-esque, fantasy-esque, historical Gothic novel. It has a lot of snow-covered, rolling hills in the English countryside. It has moors. It has creepy old houses. So the premise of The Binding is that you have a young man who lives on a farm, I think, with his family. They're English farmers. And he ends up taking an apprenticeship with someone who does book binding, a binder. And it turns out that this binder's supernatural ability is being able to take people's memories in a kind of eternal sunshine of the spotless mind kind of way, take your memories and bind them into a book so that then they are gone, they can be hidden, they can be secreted away and forgotten. And there is a layer, an intensely deep layer, of mystery when our young binder finds out more than he bargained for about himself and his own past, whilst also learning the tricks of the trade. And it evolves into a fantastic queer Gothic romance that's also full of hatred and pain and misery. The Binding is a thrill ride, peppered with dark tropes and fantastical elements, but is still overbearingly Wuthering Heightsy, Gothic-y. It isn't frightening, but it is very intense, and it is a masterpiece. The Binding is an absolute masterpiece. I love the way that she writes. I love the way that she plots her stories and the way that her stories are organized, orchestrated, and how they play out. It is fantastic plotting and characterization from start to finish. Another book on this list is The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins, which tells the story of the titular Franny Langton, who is on trial for the murder of her boss/lover. Franny Langton grew up on a plantation and now lives and works in London, but has been possibly framed for the murder of her boss/lover. It is another great queer romance in this Gothic historical fiction genre. It won the Costa First Novel Award. It is a fantastic book from start to finish, full of very wonderfully unlikable characters, which is really reminiscent of Wuthering Heights. You don't like anyone in Wuthering Heights, and you might not like anyone in The Confessions of Franny Langton, and that's part of the fun. I love unlikable characters. I love frustrating drama between people who are all in some way repulsive or at least frustrating, and I adore that. Franny Langton is getting more and more attention, it seems. Now that it's being published in the US, it's being published in paperback, it's won awards, it's winning more awards, and Sarah Collins is an incredible up-and-coming powerhouse in the world of literature. And one more book that I want to mention on this strange list of British women, Gothic, historical fiction, blah, blah, is The Watchmaker of Filigree Street and its sequel, The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow by Natasha Pulley. I preferred the first book over the second, but they work great as a pair. The Watchmaker of Filigree Street is, again, actually another queer romance, which is set in London, and it's about a Japanese watchmaker who has a kind of supernatural skill where he is able to see the future and pretty much plan his life around what he sees and where he needs to be in order for certain events to take place or to avoid or manufacture those events. And it's about his relationship with the protagonist, an Englishman whose name I have forgotten. And then the second book takes them both to Japan. And it's got a lot of very intense political intrigue. This book is almost kind of V for Vendetta-esque at certain points. Again, it's not scary. It is supernatural, but only in a kind of minor way. It's far more about the relationship between these two men in this beautiful, historical, semi-Gothic, queer romance piece of fantastical loveliness. So all of these books, I'm just going to hold this up because it's the only one I have, all of these books, the books of Laura Purcell, The Binding, The Confessions of Franny Langton, The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, and other books that I haven't read yet, like The Doll Factory and Wakenhurst and Once Upon a River. So many books I need to get to. All of these books are fantastic, historical, Gothic, maybe horror, maybe not horror, fiction by British women. And it's so exciting that we get to have all of this, and it just keeps coming. The Foundling and The Familiars, that's a pair of books that I haven't read yet. There's so much of this, and they all fit in these kind of two pillars within this big overarching category that I absolutely am in love with. If you can think of a better name for the thing I'm describing other than contemporary Gothic, please let me know. Because, no, don't let me know. I like what I call it. What do I call it again?